Hi, today I'm going to talk about Vlan trunking, and this is a part of my advanced networking course. Vlan trunking is something that you use when you want to connect more than one switch which has the same types of VLANs configured. So that, for instance, let me just show you an example here. In this case here, I have two different switches which has the same two VLANs installed. I have VLAN 10 and VLAN 20 on both of these two switches, and I've installed them all so that VLAN 10 has a range from port number 1 to port number 9. VLAN 20 has port number 10 to 23 on both of the switches. And it will work fine if I set it up like this and I connect two different cables, two cross cables between these switches, because I need that to be able to connect these two different VLANs. We can see here that when I only have two VLANs, it's okay to do it like this. But if I had like 10 different VLANs on these two switches, I would have to use 10 different crossover cables to connect all the different VLANs. And that is not an option really. So what I need to do here is I need to install trunking or configure trunking on the last port. So a trunk port is a port that does not belong to a specific VLAN, but a port that is used to send inter-VLAN traffic between all different VLANs between the switches. And how do I do that? Well, we're using a protocol called the 802.1q, which is a trunking protocol that is an IEEE standard. And what I do is that I go in and configure my interface so that it will now be a trunk port instead of an access port. And to do so, I go in and give the command switch port mode trunk. Then my port changes from being an access port to being a trunk port instead. I can also go in and configure if I want to have another type of native VLAN than the default. The default native VLAN is always VLAN 1. If I want, for instance, it to be VLAN 99 instead, I need to configure it. And I need to configure it on both ends of the trunk line, because a trunk line is of course something that you set up in both ends of the cable. I can also go in and set which VLANs I will be allowing over this trunk line. By default, and if I do nothing, then it will allow all VLANs. Or I can specify them with the command switch port trunk allowed VLAN and then VLAN 10, 20, or whatever VLANs I want. And that's basically it. When I've set that up in both ends, I have created the trunk line. If I regret and I want to change it, I can again always use the no in front of the command and it will take it off. So no switch port trunk allow VLAN or no switch port trunk native VLAN will just reset that command. And if I also regret making it a trunk port, I can go back and say switch port mode access. Then I will set the port back to being an access port instead of a trunk port. If I want to verify it, well, I can use the command show interfaces path Ethernet 01, for instance, and then switch port as the keyword here. Then it will show me that it is a trunk port, and I can see here that I'm using the .1q encapsulation. If I don't say anything, I will automatically by default have the .1q trunk port. Cisco has also created some of their own proprietary trunking protocols, but now all Cisco switches is set to use .1q as the default trunking protocol. So in this case here, I can verify it on my ports that I'm actually trunking over this port. Another thing that Cisco has creating is something called the Dynamic Trunking Protocol, DTP. It is a protocol that can somehow auto-sense what's in the other end of the cable, and it can adjust according to what's in the other end. This is something you can use if you don't want to make sure that both of the ends of a cable is set to trunk, for instance, because by default in the Cisco protocol here, it is set to something called dynamic auto. So it will adjust if the other end of the cable is a trunk port. Well, then the other end will adjust to being a trunk port as well. So it's something to help setting up trunks. It can, of course, also be something that's dangerous, because if it just automatically adjusts to what's in the other end, well then, of course, we could have a bit of a security breach there. So you need to handle this with caution. So what's the idea? Well, you can have these four different options. You can set it to dynamic auto or dynamic desirable, or you can set it to mode to trunk or to non-negotiate. Then it will just be what you set it to be. So if you set it to dynamic auto, well then if both of the ends are dynamic auto, well it will be an access point. Otherwise, if you set a trunk in the other end, it will also be adjusted to be a trunk. If you set it to dynamic desirable, well, then if both of the ends are dynamic desirable, then it will be a trunk. And also, if you have a dynamic desirable in one end and a dynamic auto in the other end, it will also be a trunk. So this will try to make the port being a trunk. Yeah, so this is just to help you and to make it easier. And you should know that all the switch ports in the Cisco switches are set to dynamic auto by default. So to sum up some of the guidelines, yeah, if you want to, you need to know that when you set up VLANs, that all ports automatically belong to VLAN 1. If you don't want that, you should, put them into some other VLAN. So if you don't want to use VLAN 1, you cannot delete it, it's always there. You should probably use it as your native VLAN, because that's much easier than trying to reconfigure everything. You can also use it as your management VLAN, for instance. Then remember to shut down all the ports that you're not using. Probably change the management VLAN. Separate the normal VLANs to the management VLANs. And yeah, you should configure SSH, put in disable auto negotiate on trunk ports so that you cannot change them, for instance, and do not use the auto or desirable switch port modes. You want to decide yourself. You want to make sure that you are in charge of whether the port is an access port or a trunk port. So let's just have a look at how to set up a trunk then. In this case here, now I have connected my two switches here with these oh no, I don't want them. These two, I take out my crossed cables, and then I connect a cross cable here on port 24, which is the one I've decided to be the trunk in both ends. And then I'll go in on one of the ends here, and I go in and configure my port 24 to be a trunk port. Just make it a little bit larger for you here. So I go into interface fast Ethernet 0/24, and I go and change it to be a switch port mode trunk. And if I don't do anything more, then I will allow all trunk or all VLANs to use this trunk, and I will allow all or the native VLAN to be VLAN 1, which I think for now it's okay. So the fun thing now should be if I'm in the other end, but just to make sure that this is also a trunk. I go into the same config T, and I go to interface, fast Ethernet 024, and I say switch port mode trunk. So now I have a trunk line in both ends, and hopefully this will work. If I try to ping now, ping 192.168.10.10. So now I'm pinging from this PC down here to this up here. Yeah, and it's working. So now I've created this trunk line between them. So whenever I connect it to either VLAN 10, which is over here, or VLAN 20, hopefully that also works. Maybe I should try to verify it for you. I can also do it here. So they will both work on both sides now, and we will just send the traffic over.